Everyone, and welcome to our teaching and learning video for this week. We're delving back into our challenge topic this time, and today's topic is Know Thy Subject. So how do we actually keep your subject knowledge up to date? What is it you are going to be doing that makes sure that when you come to teach a topic, you know what you're talking about? And not just in the vague, oh yeah, I read that in the GCSE textbook, it told me this, therefore I can just tell the kids the same thing. How do we know that bit more? How do we know enough to be sure that our lessons are therefore going to be able to challenge all of the students in our class, and we can answer whatever random questions they happen to come up with? Obviously, there's a whole range of different ways that you can do this, and we'll look at that in a moment. But before we really delve into the different techniques that we could use to improve our subject knowledge, I suppose we should really address why it's important. Why do we need to do this? Why can't we just rely on what we learnt when we were back at school? And I think that for some of our subjects, then the content is constantly changing. Being a scientist, then boy does that change. I even have here my delightful old degree textbook. So back in 1999, when I was sitting in my lovely lecture on molecular genetics, my lecturer was so thrilled to tell us all about this exciting new project that was underway, the Human Genome Project, and that in only about 4 years from then, they would have sequenced the human genome. And they were expecting there to be about 80,000 genes that we would discover. You know, the low end, there'd be at least 50,000 genes in a human, but 80,000 is where we think. Now I teach this in A-level biology because a lot of stuff has dropped down. And of course it was finished back in 2003, but there's about 19,000 genes in fact. So if I was still teaching what my good old degree taught me, I would be teaching utter garbage. So clearly, for those of us who are in subjects where the content is changing, our knowledge has to change as well. We've got to stay up to date, otherwise it's going to be an awkward moment when it comes to them having their exams marked. And for those of you sitting there thinking, oh, I'm a history teacher, history does not change. Well, even if that knowledge isn't changing, because history isn't really going to change too much, then could you actually add some additional knowledge? Therefore, open up new ways that you could teach it, new ways to engage those students, a new story maybe to hook them in so that they actually are engaged in this topic in a different way. So either your content's changing, or it might stay the same, but we can find a new way to approach it. And I've given you a little quote there from one of those papers all about what makes great teaching. And I think this just sums it up. The most effective teachers have deep knowledge of the subjects they teach, and when teachers' knowledge falls below a certain level, it is a significant impediment to students' learning. So if you are one of those people who kind of thinks, I've read it in a textbook, I've got it on my PowerPoint slideshow, I'm good, I can just read it off there, it'll be fine year on year, it clearly says you're not. The reality is that if we don't know our stuff, then our students are not going to be able to achieve as well as they could. And that just isn't right. That's not why we do this job. So how can we do this? How is it that we can improve our own subject knowledge alongside all of the day-to-day demands on our time from the usual planning, preparation, assessments, etc.? We're not going to be able to dedicate hour upon hour of our time to reading every journal, every book that's ever been published on any topic that might come up. That's ridiculous. You don't have time for that. You're a teacher. But we can do a little bit, and we can do a little bit frequently. And this is the thing. Each year, if you just pick one particular aspect of the course that you think, you know what, I want to know more about this, I want to do something different with this, then read up on it in some way. Maybe a journal, a research paper. Keep your eye on the news and see if there's any actual news stories about an aspect of your teaching. I had that with my Year 11s literally the other day, where I'd read on BBC News that morning about a vertical farm, the biggest one apparently in Europe. And then when it came to the lesson and we were talking about futuristic farming techniques, I could pull it up and say, look, this is it. This is what they're doing at the moment. And here it is, you're learning about it. When you go out, visit places, go to museums, go to art galleries. I mean, when you go out and travel, I'm one of those people that loves to go to the strange little places that no one really goes to. did have to convince my family that it would be a really great idea to go to what was called the Nazi Documentation Centre when we were in Cologne. Now I know what you're thinking, sounds really dull, but it wasn't. The reality is this random little house in Cologne called the Nazi Documentation Centre, it's not just a whole bunch of papers that you're looking at. This was actually a house that when obviously the Nazis were in Germany, then it was used to hold people captive in the basement. You can see their names and their messages on the walls down there. You go to the courtyard where you could see where people were executed. You can see the list of names of people and what they were actually basically put to death for. You can see all about the way that they then manipulated the population. And so all of a sudden there was something that sounded dull but is actually really interesting. So if I was teaching history, I could talk about that. I could actually tell them about the people whose names and little stories that I read when I was there. I could share that with them. All those sort of things help hook our kids in. They give them something that's a bit different. It's not just something we read in a textbook. You can watch documentaries around a topic because there's going to be something that is interesting, a little snippet that we can then share with them. And the key thing is, we're not expecting you to be experts in all areas overnight. This is going to take time, but your knowledge will build up. The other thing to bear in mind is we are not working in isolation here, folks. You don't have to do it all yourself. You are part of a department. Share that load. Get each person in your department to pick one topic each year to then brush up on. They can then watch stuff, read stuff, whatever it may be, come up with ideas, test them out in their lessons, and then come the end of the year, share the good things. Obviously, you can then get rid of anything that was absolutely terrible and only share those good ones so that then everyone benefits from what those individuals have done. But it saved you an awful lot of time. The thing I would say is the absolute minimum that you should do as a teacher is when there's exam questions, answer them yourself. It's quite a telling exercise. I love doing it. I'm sad like this. So whenever my students get their A-level papers, I'm normally at Michelle's door waiting until I can actually get hold of it to then be able to sit that paper myself. And when you do that, you can obviously get your one of your colleagues to actually go through, mark it and give you feedback. Or if that's a little bit too scary, you can just look at the mark scheme yourself and look at it. But when you are doing that, did you get 100%? If not, why not? Where did you go wrong? Did you misread a question? Did you miss out something critical? And when you're doing that, chances are kids are going to do the same thing. And I know this, that when I'm talking to the students, I'm sort of saying, look, okay, I've put this down. And then I was like, but here's where I went wrong. And you can sort of see them going, yeah, that's exactly what I'd have done. So if we go through that process of answering these questions ourselves, it makes us a better teacher as well. And of course, if you did my training on using examiner reports, then you will know exactly what else we can do using those examiner reports, because every year those team of people that mark the exam papers, they have to give feedback on the questions that they're marking. So you send in your comments to your team leader, and then it all gets compiled as this big report at the end of the day, which has things like the common misconceptions, the common errors that students made, even hints and tips on how to make your teaching better. So if you've not done that training, I suggest you sign up for it next year. Look out for it on our little CPD schedule, and then try some of these techniques. Let's improve our subject knowledge so that we can then make our lessons even better than they are.